Hi, boys and girls. Time for science. Open up your books to chapter 4. Make sure you have out your chapter 4 Genesis page. That is science number 5. Get those ready. And then let's get started. So we're going to begin reading with the Genesis flood. God's punishment for sin. Because remember that the flood came because of man's sin. Because the Bible says that every person on the face of the earth was thinking about was evil continually. That means every single thought of every person on the entire planet, except for Noah, was evil all the time. No good thoughts. Isn't that terrible? That'd be a terribly scary place to live. How did the Genesis flood affect the earth? According to the Bible, how the earth looks today is not the same as how the earth looked at creation. Two major catastrophes have led to the change that have greatly affected the surface of the earth. The first change happened as a result of Adam's sin against God in the Garden of Eden. Remember last week we discussed that. What was one of the effects? Well, thorns started to grow out of the ground. Remember, man had to now work hard. Before he just had to take care of it, but now he had to work hard. That says in Genesis 3:17-19 says that God cursed the ground, causing it to grow thorns and thistles. Now listen, the original plan for the earth was for it to produce food without weeds. How many of you would like to go out and be able to plant a garden and have no weeds come up and no bugs would eat your garden? That would be great. And that's how God intended. God intended for the world, the land before the fall, before man's sin, he intended for it to produce food without any weeds. But all this changed as a result of man's sin. So that was the first catastrophe, man's sin. The second catastrophe was also a result of man's sin. Genesis 6:38 says that man had become so wicked that God determined to flood the entire earth to destroy the human race. Noah and his family were the only humans saved from the flood. This worldwide flood not only killed all air-breathing, land-dwelling animals on board the ark, but made major changes to the face of the earth. Layers of sediment were quickly laid down over the earth, resulting in sedimentary rock formations and multitudes of fossils that we see today. It is probable that the earth was associated with the breaking up of the earth's outer crust into places. Most scientists, both creationists and evolutionists, agree that the continents we have today used to be all one landmass, and we're going to discuss that in a minute. However, they disagree on what caused the landmass to break apart. So see, all science agrees that before all the land was one. Okay, look on the back of your paper. You see, they believe that all land, see, this is our world today, and they believe that all land used to be like, kind of like this, something like this. All the land used to be in one place. And we'll discuss that in a minute. So they both believe that. But evolutionists believe that the land moved over millions and billions of years, whereas creationists believe that it was a flood that caused the land to separate and the land to change, okay? However, they disagree what caused the landmass to break apart. Many creationists believe this was part of the flood. This breaking apart of the land led to massive volcanic activity and earth movements that resulted in the high mountain ranges we see today. Because remember, the Bible talks about the depths of the earth bursting forth, right? Is what it also talks about. Also, the flood caused major changes in the climate. It is believed that before the flood, the climate was mostly tropical worldwide. Tropical is kind of like what they have in the southern part of Mexico, where it's always warm. It doesn't turn winter, and it's basically warm the whole time. But not such a heat before the flood, not such a heat that's so hot like today. But it was more of a natural, tropical type of climate without those super duper hot areas, okay? After the flood, it was much colder, both because of cloud formation and because of increased ash in the air due to the volcanic activity. Because you know, when a volcano explodes, all the smoke goes up. You look outside now, you see all the smoke from all the fires, don't you? Imagine if you had volcanoes all over the world going off and shooting up smoke. Go on YouTube and search out volcanoes erupting or volcanoes exploding. Volcanoes erupting would probably be better. And you'll see all the ash, all the smoke, all the stuff that comes out of the volcanoes. Imagine if all the volcanoes in the world were doing that, how much dust would have been in the air, right? A cooler climate along with more, all right, turn to page 22, more moisture from the warmer oceans due to the earth set up conditions that led to an ice age, or the ice age. So most of what we see on the surface of the earth and most of what we study in geology is a direct result of God's judgment on the earth because of man's sin. Despite these judgments, the earth is still a magnificent place to live and an exciting place to study. But it is amazing to realize how wonderful the earth must have been at creation before the fall and before the flood. Just think, as beautiful as the world is now, I mean, as beautiful as the trees and the skies can be and the flowers, it was even more beautiful before the fall, before sin, before the flood. Can you imagine what it would have been like? And we're going to see something like that again. Someday we will experience God's complete plan for the earth. Revelations 2 or 21, 1 through 2 says, "Now I see a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth have passed away. Also, there was no more sea." So in the new world, there's no ocean. That's kind of weird. "Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband." As we look forward to this, we can study the earth we have today and still see God's mighty hand. All right, now let's look back in its design. Let's look back here. Let's look down at the fun fact. Let's read that. This was interesting. Although the Bible gives us a true account of the flood, many civilizations have flood stories as part of their history. For example, one of the oldest stories in existence is the Epic of Gilgamesh. This book contains the story of a man who built a boat that saved the lives of his family during a flood. The Chinese, the Toltec, and the Babylonian civilizations also have flood stories. In fact, there have been over 270 flood stories or records found around the world. That means as they're going and digging, they dig up and they find books or records or drawings or carvings that talk about a worldwide flood. And some guy getting on a boat while the earth was flooded. That's pretty cool, right? So it's not just the Bible that talks about a flood. It's also other civilizations, because these stories were carried down from Noah's sons to his grandkids, to his great-grandkids, to his great-great-grandkids, right? Pretty awesome stuff. So, all right. Picture of the original earth. Let's read that. Imagine what the world with no sin might have looked like. Can you imagine right now our world with no sin? Would we need policemen? No, because everyone would do what's right. No one would steal, no one would kill, no one would do anything wrong. Imagine how beautiful everything would be with no sin. It'd probably been very green and lush with no weeds or unpleasant plants. Genesis tells us that everything in Eden was watered by dew and underground springs, and there was no death. We know that God declared it to be very good, right? Think about that. There was no death, and there was no rain. When the flood happened, that was the first time people had ever seen rain, because it was just a mist that went up every morning. Have you ever woken up in the morning even though it doesn't rain and the grass is dewy, wet? It's kind of like that. That's how God watered all the plants in the beginning, but things changed with the flood. Okay? And then down here, if you wanted to read this about did the flood really happen, you know there's going to be people who say the Bible's not true, the Bible is all fairy tales and make-believe. But a lot of the evidence that we have scientifically, even though we can't prove it scientifically, we can't prove that there was a worldwide flood because no one was there to see it. We can't prove how creation happened because no one was there to see it. But we have a lot of evidence that points more towards a big flood rather than evolution. There's more evidence when we look at geology and we look at the study of the earth and we look at how the fossils are laid and we look at the different layers of the land and we look at all these different things. There's much more evidence to point towards a flood than there is towards evolution. All right? So if you wanted to also, go ahead and read the search for Noah's Ark. There's people that actually look for Noah's Ark. I found this one guy. I met this one guy who said he'd actually found Noah's Ark. Now, we don't really know it. The mountains where the Noah's Ark was supposed to sit is in a country called Turkey. Now, Turkey's basically closed its borders and will not allow really hardly anybody in. So nobody's really been able to go and excavate because it's on the top of the mountains of Ararat. We're not really sure because some of those mountains are up to 17,000 feet high. You can read it in here. It's very, very interesting. So go ahead and read that. All right, pull out your papers and let's look at this. Now, here in 2 Peter 2:3, we're going to read something here. So I want you, we're going to talk about this in just a second. We're going to list those on the board, but I want you to turn to the back of your page first. So everybody turn to the back of your page. You guys can fill these out on your own time. We're going to do this part together. So if it's blank, that shows me y'all didn't listen to the video. If it's not blank, it shows me you listened to the video. But we're going to turn to the back, okay? So on the back, do you see the first one? This is the original supercontinent. It's made of cratons. Now, craton is what was considered to be, the original landmass. Now, why do we think why do we think that there was originally just one landmass? Now, in Genesis 1, 9 through 10, it says, on the third day of creation, God gathered the waters into one place, and he separated it from dry land. So the waters were in one place, and the land was in another. So we do a little deduction, and we think about this. If the land and earth are separate, that means all the land is in one place, and all the land is in another right now. Okay? Also, let's look at 2 Peter. Open your Bibles to 2 Peter. Everybody open your Bibles to 2 Peter, 2 Peter, chapter 3, verse 6. It says, whereby the world that was being overflowed with water perished. It means the old world has passed away. The world of Noah's time is no longer here. The world of Adam's time, which was something like this might not be exactly, but this is the idea that they have. Like this is not like this anymore. It changed to this. So this was before Noah's flood. This was after Noah's flood. And as time went on, it ended up going like this because the land, land is still moving. Okay? That's why we have earthquakes. And we're going to study that because you have two plates in the earth and they go like this and they move and boom. And it just causes everything to shake. So the plates in the earth are still moving. Things in the earth still move. And so notice where the yellow is. The yellow is supposedly North America. The red is like Africa. The blue is South America. And the green is like Europe. And the other one is like Asia. Okay? So we can see. Now, is this exactly how it was? We have no idea. This is just scientists guessing. But it was something kind of like this. They used to be all together. They separated during the flood. And then they separated even more. Okay? And God directed all of it. It was the way he wanted it to happen. Okay? So let's look at something here. Evidence indicates that the continents have moved around, broken apart, and even crashed together. So look here. They're separate. Here they're separate, but then here they're all together. The colors, you see that? Look at these colors. They've separated. These colors, they've come together, right? So they've crashed together. But some of the core pieces seem to have survived. And they believe like North America and parts of Africa and Asia and even parts of Europe were the original land that God created, but it's moved, okay? Geologists call these pieces cratons, all right? North America appears to be one of the cratons. In fact, most geologists believe it was a major component of the early supercontinent. So the early supercontinent, which means one big continent, they believe, so look, this is kind of an idea of what it might have looked like. See, all the land in one place, all the water in another place. And now it's not like that. They believe it was one of the main areas, okay? Now we're gonna put some words on here. Let me find the words. So on your paper, you have lines. So the first one right here, this original supercontinent, this one is what they call the Rodinia. Everybody write Rodinia on there. The second one is called Pangaea. And then the last one would just be what it is today. Okay? So write those on your list or on your lines. So this one right here would be Rodinia, Pangaea, and this one would be today. So Rodinia, Pangaea, today. So this is the supercontinent, a temporary supercontinent, and this is our modern continents, okay? They're made from the original, our continents are still comprised of the original land that was there when God first created, because water moved, there's been erosion, masses have come together over time, then we have what we have the world today. Now, of course, do we know exactly that that's exactly how it happened? No. This is what scientists are guessing happened, okay? So our modern continents are made out of pieces from the original Earth, which broke apart during the flood. So notice that right here, they're all together, and notice here, they broke apart. You see how they're separated? You see how they become separate here? The flood broke them apart, and then they kept drifting apart to form the continents that we have today. Now, also, I want you to color your picture. This is a picture of Noah's Ark. Here's the ark. Remember, it was long and square. It was not this round little thing that we see in a lot of the books with little animals hanging their heads out the windows. That kind of boat would have sunk within minutes of this flood. But this one is a huge barge, which was made for dangerous waters and made to stay afloat, okay? So color the picture nicely. I want to see it colored. Now let's go to number 4, okay? you're going to see some things. We're going to list some ideas of things that would have happened during the flood. So number one, what is something that would have happened during the flood? Would all the fish have been killed during the flood? Well, of course, no. Would some fish have been killed during the flood? Well, yes, it would have, right? That's how we have some fossils of fish, because the dirt comes and covers them very fast and creates a fossil. But we're going to write a few things here that, okay, water would wash away. Put on number one. Water would wash away. What would it do? Wash away rocks, soil, and what else? And even buildings. Right? It would wash those things away. Another thing, millions of animals and people would die. Is that something that would happen during the flood? Yeah. That's something that would happen. Land would be changed, wouldn't it? How many of you have seen dirt roads? And after it rains, all of a sudden the dirt roads have like these ditches in them, just from a little bit of rain. Imagine tons of rain and flood and tsunamis and huge waves and all this. How much would the land have changed, right? So land would have been changed, all right? What else would happen? Let's put large animals. Let's do one more. And that's all you have to do. Large animals would be, what would happen to these large animals? Covered with what? Covered with sand and dirt. There's a lot of things that would happen, right? New paths would be formed through water. Plants would be uprooted and killed. Debris would settle out of water. There's a lot of things that would happen. But you notice, large animals would be covered with sand and dirt, which would make, and a lot of pressure because it's a lot of dirt on them, plus all these miles of water on top of them. The pressure that they'd be under would create fossils, okay? Now, remember when you did your flood jar and you shook it up? What happened? There were things that fell, and then your dirt went on top of it, didn't it? You could see rocks and all that kind of stuff. Same thing with animals. The dead animals would float down, and the dirt would settle over it, and the pressure would create fossils over time. All right, so fill those out. Now, you have here, what was God's intention for the land before the fall? I went over that. What 5 things would happen? It's right there in those pages. What 2 things led to the perfect conditions for an ice age? Those are there. We filled these out here. I want you to write down the names that we wrote and color the picture, and that will be science for today. All right, boys and girls, we'll see you next week for another science. Bye.